The Constitution can't enforce itself. It never could and never will. That's because mere words on paper, what many in the founding generation referred to as a parchment barrier, well, they don't actually stop government people from doing the things that government people always do. So on this episode, I've got some great insight and perspective on parchment barriers from leading founders like Roger Sherman, John Dickinson, James Madison, and a few others. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the Fast Friday edition of the show for August 2nd, 2024. Let's kick it off here with Roger Sherman writing as a countryman for the Federalist side in November of 1787. He said, "No Bill of Rights ever yet bound the supreme power longer than the honeymoon of a new married couple, unless the rulers were interested in preserving the rights." Sherman understood that just because you put things down on paper, no matter how good it may sound, you can't rely on people with power to follow the rules given to them. On the anti-federalist side, Patrick Henry had a shorter version of this, but very similar. He said, "Tell me not of checks on paper, but tell me of checks founded on self-love." And this kind of view is really based on the long-held maxim, the widely accepted view, well, that human beings are flawed creatures and power will always seek to expand and grow. And that's how St. George Tucker put it in his great View of the Constitution of the United States. Of course, all these original source documents are going to be linked to in the show notes. We publish a blog post for every episode over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty a couple of hours after the live stream is done. Power always seeks to expand and grow, and Tucker put it like this: all governments have a natural tendency towards an increase and assumption of power. Again, all governments, not some, not a few, not just in history, not just over there, but all governments. And he recognized here in 1803 that that was happening in the American governments as well. He said, and the administration of the federal government has too frequently demonstrated that the people of America are not exempt from this vice in their Constitution. We have seen that parchment chains are not sufficient to correct this unhappy propensity. And this kind of understanding led John Dickinson, who we could call the father of the Articles of Confederation, but was a supporter of the Constitution during ratification, writing in Fabius number 4. He said, "A good Constitution promotes, but not always produces a good administration." This is the recognition that doesn't matter how good the Constitution may be, you can't guarantee a good administration. Now, certainly, we've seen that play out plenty of times in our life. Just a quick aside, this is a great one from Lysander Spooner. His essay on the trial by jury, those of you who know, you know, written in 1852. And he's pointing out the same kind of thing, but going further back in history. After Magna Carta, it required much more audacity, cunning, or strength on the part of the king than it had before to invade the people's liberties with impunity. That kind of reaffirms what Dickinson was saying. A good constitution can promote a good administration because it makes it more difficult to just have brazen attacks that go beyond the rules when they're written down on paper. And even Spooner is acknowledging that as well. But the caveat is it doesn't actually end the violation of people's rights. He said, still, Magna Carta, like all other written constitutions, proved inadequate to the full accomplishment of its purpose. For when did a parchment ever have power adequately to restrain a government that had either cunning to evade its requirements or strength to overcome those who attempted its defense? And Spooner understood, just like so many in the founding generation understood, that words on paper can't enforce themselves. John Adams made a very similar observation about Magna Carta, writing to his son, John Quincy Adams, in 1805. He said, Magna Carta was a mere piece of parchment which every triumphant faction neglected or violated at its pleasure. Even much more than our national and state constitutions are disregarded at this day. So Adams is pointing out that by 1805, these federal and state constitutions are being violated pretty consistently. And James Madison pointed this out as well in a letter to Thomas Jefferson. He said, experience proves the inefficacy of a Bill of Rights on those occasions when its control is most needed. Repeated violations of these parchment barriers have been committed by overbearing majorities in every state. In Virginia, I have seen the Bill of Rights violated in every instance where it has been opposed to a popular current. So anytime something is popular, government people are going to do, wherever the political winds are blowing, they're going to do whatever they're going to do. And they're going to get away with whatever the people let them get away with. And that's James Madison writing to Thomas Jefferson. And he had written something very similar some months earlier in Federalist number 48. And he said, will it be sufficient to mark with precision the boundaries of these departments in the Constitution of the government, and to trust to these parchment barriers against the encroaching spirit of power? It's an essential question. How much do you spend the time to get everything perfect on paper and then just trust that you're going to get things right? He says, well, this is not a great idea. He said, this is the security which appears to have been principally relied on by the compilers of most of the American constitutions. But experience assures us that the efficacy of the provision has been greatly overrated, and that some more adequate defense is indispensably necessary for the more feeble against the more powerful members of government. Again, that's James Madison in Federalist number 48. And I do encourage you to read the whole thing. Of course, that'll be linked to in the show notes, along with everything else. But Madison then went on in Fed 48 to write about two examples that he considered glaring. One of them he touched upon in that letter to Thomas Jefferson, but the second one being Pennsylvania. And he put it like this: a great number of laws had been passed violating without any apparent necessity the rule requiring that all bills of a public nature shall be previously printed for the consideration of the people, although this is one of the precautions chiefly relied on by the Constitution against improper acts of the legislature. So there's a rule that they have to do certain things, and then they just violated that rule whenever they needed to. He said the constitutional trial by jury had been violated, and powers assumed which had not been delegated by that Constitution. Executive powers had been usurped, and he keeps going and going and going. So basically he's saying the Pennsylvania Constitution, they've got all kinds of rules in there, and you can just look through the history of how it's played out, and they have not followed those rules, because as long as you rely on a parchment barrier, people with power will always seek to expand their power. Now, even Alexander Hamilton, in support of the veto power in Federalist number 73, he really was referencing Madison's argument back in Federalist 48. And he said the propensity of the legislative department to intrude upon the rights and to absorb the powers of the other departments has been already suggested and repeated. The insufficiency of a mere parchment delineation, the boundaries of each, has also been remarked upon, and the necessity of furnishing each with constitutional arms for its own defense has been inferred and proved. So that's just another reiteration of the argument that it's got to be just something more than just the words on paper. Joseph Jones, in a letter to James Madison in 1792, just after things started going into effect, this was just after the Bill of Rights had been ratified, he points out that we are going to have some problems here. He said, our new system, like all parchment securities, cannot defend us against the attacks of artful and designing men. Now, if everyone was going to be trustworthy and loved liberty and wanted to follow the rules, everything would be awesome. And that's what Patrick Henry really argued about during the Virginia Ratifying Convention over and over and over. He said, if you had good senators, representatives, and a good president, everything's going to be fine. Everything's cool then. But can you expect that from human nature? And if you answered no, of course, Patrick Henry would give you a passing grade. So again, a constitution can't protect you from people who don't care about the limits of the Constitution. Words specifying powers, given though commonly well understood to serve particular purposes, are but too often strangely twisted and tortured into meanings they were not conceived to bear. So even if you explain exactly how things are supposed to be, People will always expand that power. John Dickinson, the penman of the American Revolution, author of the most widely read documents on American liberty up until publication of Thomas Paine's Common Sense in 1776, pointed out that all artful rulers will always try to give the expansion of their power the most semblance of legality as possible. This is my paraphrase of it, but he's basically saying, like, look, they're going to expand power. They will twist definitions in order to justify what they're doing. And that certainly sounds familiar to what we live under today, but it is nothing new. And Jones continued. He said, unfortunately, our new paper security is in some parts exposed to these attacks and will be found to be a flimsy defense against measures supported by a powerful party interest. Now, back to Madison in Federalist 48, he said, the conclusion which I am warranted in drawing from these observations is this: a mere demarcation on parchment of the constitutional limits of the several departments is not a sufficient guard against those encroachments which lead to a tyrannical concentration of all the powers of government in the same hands. Well, where do we go with that? Well, John Dickinson asked the essential question there in Fabius number 4. He said it must be granted that a bad administration may take place, of course, because he had said a good constitution promotes a good administration but doesn't guarantee it. So then you might have a bad one. He said, what is then to be done? The answer is instantly found before the supreme sovereignty of the people. Sovereignty meaning final authority. The people are superior to their constitutions, which are superior to their governments. And so the answer is with the people. He said it is their duty to watch and their right to take care that the Constitution be preserved, or in the Roman phrase on perilous occasions, to provide that the Republic receive no damage. And we see similar takes like this. It could be the people at large, the people of the several states, the state legislatures, which are tools of the people of each state. Here's Theophilus Parsons making that case. He said, there is another check founded in the nature of the Union superior to all the parchment checks that can be invented. If there should be a usurpation, it will be upon 13 legislatures, completely organized, possessed of the confidence of the people, and having the means as well as inclination successfully to oppose it. So Parsons is telling us the state legislatures, if they are willing to take a stand, have the means and the power to stop a federal act dead in its track. And he goes on, because there's more. He said, the people themselves have it in their power effectually to resist usurpation without being driven to an appeal to arms. An act of usurpation is not obligatory. It is not law. And any man may be justified in his resistance. But this is the great part here. He said, let him be considered as a criminal by the general government. He's not saying the states or the people in each state are going to be able to overturn what the feds do. He's just saying, look, they may try to pass stuff, but we're going to resist it. They'll consider us criminals, but only his fellow citizens can convict him. They are his jury. And if they pronounce him innocent, not all the powers of Congress can hurt him. And one more here from Roger Sherman, I think tying it all together. This is in December of 1787. He said, all acts of the Congress not warranted by the Constitution would be void, nor could they be enforced contrary to the sense of a majority of the states. And from that simple statement, and I think tying everything else together from all the other ones as well, we get 4 essential points, especially from Sherman here. 1, governments are going to do what governments do. They violate the rules given to them every chance they get. 2, just telling them to stop, well, that doesn't work. They'll still try to enforce their stuff. They will certainly try to continue enforcement. But in the federal system under the Constitution, when a bunch of states refuse to go along, the feds don't have the resources, the person power to get the job done. We know that states are partners with the federal government, according to the National Governors Association, on most federal programs. But here's the dirty little secret that supporters of the monster state don't want you to know, and that's partnerships don't work when half the team quits. So states have to opt out of enforcing federal acts for the federal government, and that's part of their duty to stand up for their oath to the Constitution. But most important is number 4. This requires a people who are willing to refuse to comply because there's absolutely nothing to enforce if all the people just simply continue to obey. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope it made you think that's more important than anything. If you support our work and you want to help us reach and teach more people with these essential foundational principles, absolutely nothing helps us get the job done every single day more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you got a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. $2 a month is the starting point for our membership program. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I'd be extremely grateful for any consideration you can give to joining us today. You can also smash the like button, leave comments in the archive, reviews on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform. All these things can help trigger the algorithms and tell them to show us to more people. I'm very grateful for your support, your help. I'm grateful that you spent some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hope you have an awesome weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next week here on the Path to Liberty.